Hi everyone, Sam here, otherwise known as FPL Pricey. In today's video, we're going to take a look at 7 fantastic differentials who I believe are being seriously overlooked ahead of Game Week 1. In the meantime, please feel free to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed today's content. For now though, let's crack on with the show. First off, just a quick reminder that all of the data from today's episode is from Fantasy Football Hub. Thank you very much to them, and if you wanted to sign up, the link is in the description below. In the meantime though, player number 1, and he is the poster boy for today's episode, that is Leon Bailey. Now, 6.5 million is, in my view, incredible value for a player of his ability, and at only 3.6% ownership, I think he's being seriously overlooked. There are a few people talking about him in the FPL community, but for my money, nowhere near enough. He was fantastic last season, double digits in both goals and assists, over 20 overall, of course. And the fact that that is pretty evenly balanced between goals and assists also is pretty good news. He is an out-and-out winger, plays off the right-hand side predominantly, and without other players this season who are off, so Diaby, for instance, is off to Saudi Arabia, there will be less competition for his spot down that right wing. So all of this data that you see on screen is from not limited minutes, because he did play quite a lot, but he was taken off early sometimes, he did miss the odd match, and maybe he wasn't as nailed last season as I would expect him to be this season if he were to keep up this sort of form. Towards the back end of the season, he was being very much trusted by Emery, and he became the number 1 pick down that right-hand side, where previously in the season and in previous seasons at Villa, he never really nailed down his starting spot. And it is a shame because previously his data always looked really good. As you can see on screen, 0.27 XG and 0.31 XA per 90 combines to make pretty elite numbers. That's 0.58 XGI per 90. For a midfielder, especially at his price point, 6.5 million, that is incredible value for money. The doubt, obviously, historically was minutes. I would expect him to get much better minutes this season if he continues that form. And overall, the hub tends to agree. As you can see in the final point of this spreadsheet, the expected points for the next 5, that's the first 5 games in the season, you can see the ticker at the bottom of the screen, 24.4. I think that's one of the highest out of all of the differentials I'm going to be talking about today. That's almost 5 points a game for someone who's not on penalties, who historically hasn't gotten 80 plus minutes regularly. That just shows how highly they're rating him, and I do tend to agree with that assumption. Overall, I really like him. He's currently in my draft for Game Week 1 as a bit of a differential, and if for whatever reason you don't want Ollie Watkins, or you can't afford to have Ollie Watkins in your front line, 9 million isn't cheap, Leon Bailey at 6.5 is maybe that easy entry into the Villa attack. And I hate the word coverage. I don't really like using it in FPL terms, but maybe there is an argument that just covering off the Aston Villa attacker with Bailey could be a way to mitigate against Ollie Watkins doing damage to your rank. He's been very involved. In fact, I think the underlying attacking data is as good as Ollie Watkins was last season. So overall, can't really fault it. Differential at 6.5 million. Leon Bailey, absolutely fine by me. While we're at the 6.5 million midfielder price point, another player I wanted to talk about who is incredibly differential and, in fairness, with good reason, is Harvey Barnes. Under 1% ownership and at 6.5 million, he could be very much overlooked by a lot of managers going into Game Week 1. And the main reason for that also is reflected in the data from last season. Only 5 goals, 3 assists, and the expected points from Hub is only 11 across the first 5. The reason for that is because minutes-wise, last season in particular, he was a major doubt. That was mainly down to injury. Once he was fit and firing again, he did regain his place in the starting 11. So I actually think the expected points here is relatively harsh, or maybe underestimated at the very least, because I would expect him to regain that starting spot relatively quickly. And if he does, especially operating down that left-hand side where he does his best work, Newcastle are able to get their wingers into very advanced and central areas, as we saw with Anthony Gordon last year. They'll win a lot of penalties, as again we saw last year with Gordon. And the data for Harvey Barnes, despite the fact he's 1 million less than his teammate on the other side, his data is actually as good, if not slightly better, at 0.65 XGI per 90. Yes, that's from limited minutes, so maybe there's a bit of regression that will occur. But even if he does draw back a little bit from this data, it will still be above 0.5 you'd expect. And for a player of his value, that is still very, very good. Newcastle are a great team. They're very well put together. Not a lot going on in the transfer market, so you'd expect that front three to look similar to Harvey Barnes down the left, Isak through the middle, and then Gordon down the right. Now, maybe the assumption there is that Barnes regains his spot on the left and Gordon goes right. We haven't really seen that happen too much last season, although a lot of the times Barnes started, weirdly, Gordon was either injured or suspended towards the back end of the season. So we never really saw more than 1 or 2 matches where Eddie Howe had that question to answer. And when he did have that question to answer, as far as my digging goes, he played Gordon off the right and kept Barnes on his favoured left-hand side. Newcastle fans, please do comment below if that is incorrect. I'd hate to give out incorrect data, but from what I can see and also from what I can remember, Barnes tended to play on the left-hand side, especially when Gordon was in the starting 11. He played him off the right. Again, let me know in the comments below if that is incorrect. But either way, I would say Newcastle's strongest front three would be Isak through the middle, Gordon and Barnes on either wing, and then it looks like Callum Wilson might be off. If not, he is, I think, dealing with an injury as per normal anyway. And I actually really do like Harvey Barnes as a cut price version of Anthony Gordon for 1 million less and actually slightly better data as well. So there's not really a lot going against it. The Hub's projected points are a little bit low because of the injuries from last season, but I'd expect him to outdo that by quite a long margin, especially considering the fixtures that Newcastle have to start the season with. Very, very positive indeed. So let me know in the comments below what you think of Harvey Barnes and how he stacks up against some of the other midfielders that I'm talking about on the show today. So a quick look at one defender that is definitely flying under the radar, although starting to pick up a little bit more traction on social media now, and that is Andy Robertson. Now, to start with, and to be honest, still now, I really do like the look of Alexander-Arnold at 7 million. That in itself, I think, is a good price for a player of his calibre, but a player that I didn't really consider to start with, and now I'm starting to come around to the idea of, is Andy Robertson at 1 million cheaper. He's only 7.8% owned. I do expect that to start rising fairly quickly before the start of the season as people catch on to the idea of him being a good option. And the underlying data from last season, despite the fact that he was never really a factor for us, and that was partly because of injury, it was partly because Liverpool at times weren't operating at full capacity, his data was actually really, really positive at 0.33 XGI per 90. For a defender outside of Trent Alexander-Arnold, that is almost unheard of. That is fantastic underlying data. And at 6 million, if you disregard Trent, that is in itself a very, very good pick. He was unlucky not to get more attacking returns than he did last season, but still, five attacking returns in limited minutes, not bad at all. He should come back into the side fit and firing, ready for the new season as well. And the fixtures for the first 5 game weeks look fantastic. So there's going to be a lot of managers out there trying to squeeze in Liverpool players. Salah's going to be popular. Trent is obviously going to be popular. But there are lots of other expensive picks as well. So if you're looking at just shaving 1 million out of the budget to use elsewhere, Robertson over Trent might be a really good differential option, especially when you think about it. They're going to be playing pretty similar roles on either sides of the pitch. Trent is obviously going to be very advanced under Arne Slot, but you'd expect that to also come from the left wing back or the left back as well, and Andy Robertson should be pretty nailed down that left-hand flank as well. The data's great. The expected points from Fantasy Football Hub also look really strong. 26.7 is actually slightly better than the expected points from Trent, and whilst I wouldn't take any of that as gospel, I think it does give an indication as to how good an asset Robertson will be and the fact that he is maybe flying under the radar just a little bit to start the season with. Now, I will be doing a much more extended look at the defenders in total across the FPL base in a video in the next couple of weeks. But for the time being, one player I did want to mention was Andy Robertson because I think people are starting to catch on to him, and I can see him sneaking his way into my draft at some point in the next couple of weeks. Let me know what you think of Trent versus Andy Robertson in the comments below, and whether or not you think the 1 million saving is worth it. So on to the forward line, a couple of strikers that I've definitely got my eye on to start off the season with, and the first off is Rodrigo Muniz. Had a breakout season at Fulham last year, came away with 9 goals and 2 assists from pretty much half a season, and really went on a hot streak after Christmas where he became a bit of a darling for a lot of our FPL sides. So it is maybe a slight surprise that he's only 4% owned. That might be down to the fact that there are a lot of good forward options in FPL this season. But the underlying data for 6 million is absolutely fantastic. 0.49 XG per 90, absolutely outstanding. And he will lead the line for Fulham. He will be talismanic. And the bonus points, the way that the system has changed, should favour talismanic strikers quite heavily. So he could be in for a pretty blockbuster season if he scores at the same rate or a similar rate to what he did when he came into the side last season for Fulham. Now, one thing I would like to mention is wildcarding and also wildcard windows are something that will come onto our radars in the next few weeks as we start planning for the first few weeks of the FPL season. It always happens, trust me, it will start to come into the discussion. Now, one window that I'm really strongly considering is a wildcard after game week 5 into game week 6. That could give me the opportunity of banking or rolling a few transfers going into game week 5 and then coming out of game week 5 with the wildcard being used, optimizing my team, and also have all of those transfers banked, ready to make any other moves in a few game weeks' time as well. Now, the reason I bring that up is because Fulham's opening 5 fixtures on the ticker, according to not just Fantasy Football Hub, but across the board, looks like one of the best set of fixtures that you can possibly get. So if you're eyeing up a game week 5 into 6 wildcard where there is a big fixture swing across the board, it will be quite a popular one. Rodrigo Muniz would make a lot of sense to have as your third forward for those opening 5 game weeks. Now, Man United away, okay, it's red on the ticket. It's not the easiest on paper, but Man United's defensive data last season was not anything fantastic by any means. I think it was comfortably lower half. And yes, they'll probably improve, but it's still not a fixture I'm particularly worried about getting attacking returns in. And then after that, the next 3, absolutely fantastic. Leicester at home, promoted club. Ipswich away, promoted club. West Ham at home under new management, you never know. And of course, it's a London derby too. And then Newcastle at home gives us 3 home fixtures in those 4 games between game week 2 and game week 5. The hardest one being Newcastle at home. And even that, at Craven Cottage, I wouldn't mind that for an attacking return either. The expected points for that bank of 5 games is 24.5. That's almost 5 points a game on average. Again, always take that with a pinch of salt, but it's a good indicator. And importantly, what it does is gives me a nice window of opportunity with Muniz to enjoy that set of fixtures. And then if I'm wildcarding out in game week 6 anyway, then I can take him back out for the fixture swing as it becomes a little bit more brutal for Fulham. And I can look at other strikers at that point. But for the time being, this guy looks like the real deal, great underlying data, and a great set of fixtures for the opening 5. You don't even need to wildcard in game week 6 to make this a good move. You can just look at switching him out, or maybe even holding on to him if he gets off to a bit of a tear in FPL. And the price could easily be 6.5, 6.6 after 6 or 7 game weeks if he gets off to a stormer. And honestly, there's not really a lot going against it that I would be convinced that he wouldn't get off to a good start. So again, he's one option. Another option is coming right up though. If you're not interested in Rodrigo Muniz, perhaps I can tempt you in another 6 million forward flying under the radar. 2.5% owned, Chris Wood. I actually cannot believe he's not more popular at the moment. Great price, great ownership as well if you want a differential. And look at that XG per 90. 0.58 is phenomenal. Even if he was playing for a top 6 side, priced at 8 million, 9 million, that would not be too bad either, and you should be still in the conversation. But 0.58 for a 6 million striker is absolutely phenomenal. 14 goals last season. I actually had to go and double check that because I just cannot remember him scoring that many. But it happened, 14 goals, fantastic return in the league, and the expected points are also slightly better than Muniz for the first 5 game weeks. Like I said, this could suit a game week 5 wildcard, or you could just hold on to him for the first 3 game weeks. Bournemouth at home, Southampton away, Wolves at home. That's a great run of fixtures anyway. And then, okay, Liverpool, Brighton, both away from home. Not a great pairing in 4 and 5. But you could use a transfer to get rid of him by that point. You could have a stronger bench and bench him in those games. Or finally, good strikers are usually able to score no matter who the opposition is. And it's not like I'm massively scared of either of those defences anyway. So you could arguably just hold on to him for those two either. Now, the final thing to say on Chris Wood is historically Nottingham Forest and actually Fulham with Muniz as well aren't a team that necessarily score tons and tons of goals. But at 6 million, you're looking at the talismanic figures for both of those sides. And if they are scoring 1 or 2 a game, it is very likely that these two are going to be the players scoring the goals. And if they do score the goals, because other players in their team are much less likely to also contribute, it's pretty likely that these guys are the ones that will be hogging the bonus points as well. So 1 goal for a striker, normally worth 4, maybe 5 points if you add a bonus point. In these 2 cases, might be worth 7 points quite easily if they score the winning goal, if they are the player that stands out just through getting shots on target, being a nuisance in the box, and maybe grabbing a goal as well. They can quite easily become 7-point goals for these 2 strikers. Whereas with others, maybe not quite so easy if they're in a team that scores 4 or 5 a game. Yes, of course, it's more likely that they also score 2 or 3, but it's much less likely that they get bonus as well with other players contributing, especially from the midfield positions. Overall, there's not really a lot going against either Chris Wood or Muniz as a few short-term game week punt at the start of the season. I am interested to know which out of these 2 you prefer though, or if you are still unconvinced by either and you prefer to go for someone like an Adam Armstrong at 5.5 or a Joao Pedro at Brighton, who is on penalties at 5.5 and also has phenomenal data. Bringing it back to the midfielders for a moment, and Brennan Johnson is another player that I've got my eye on for the start of the season, will be incredibly differential, 1.8% ownership, and to be honest, even if there's a bit of hype around him, I think he'll be overlooked anyway. I don't think his ownership is going to rise past 5% at an absolute push by the start of the season, no matter how good a preseason he has. The thing with Brennan Johnson historically has been that he's not been great in front of goal, and yes, the same can be said for last season. I'm going to ping up a screenshot right now of his shots on target or goals versus missed shots last season. It wasn't great reading, so he does underperform on his XG data. That being said though, the XG data itself at 0.4 XG per 90 is very, very strong. So maybe you'd expect some sort of reversion to the mean for Brennan Johnson over time. And hopefully, if he gets his shooting boots on, this sort of underlying data is akin to a player far, far more valuable than a 6.5. So again, it is a risk. Maybe expected minutes could be in doubt, but to be honest, with Richarlison kind of always injured at the moment, and the fact that he did work his way into the strongest starting 11 at the back end of the season last year, and also the fact that he seems to be having a very decent preseason, I would be quite surprised if he wasn't a regular starter for Spurs for at least the first set of fixtures. That set of fixtures, especially the first 2, look really good. Leicester away, Everton at home, so you could get off to a flyer there. And with the team around him and the style of play that Ange likes to play, he should still find himself in front of goal, plenty of scoring chances. And again, the way they like to play usually releases spaces at the other side of the box, so the side that the attack isn't flowing down. And Brennan Johnson finds himself at the back post with basically the freedom of the goal in front of him more regularly than maybe you'd expect a 6.5 million midfielder to get. So again, I'm not saying he's essential by any means. I think he will remain differential, but if you want to take a punt and you hope that he gets his shooting boots on, I do really like him as a very, very differential shout. So finally, before I wrap up today, I wanted to quickly put a word in for James Maddison, who a lot of us forgot about towards the tail end of last season. However, if you cast your mind back to the start of last season, he got off to a bit of a flyer in a Spurs shirt. And I do expect that to be the case this season as well. The underlying data is very, very strong, matched pretty evenly between goals and assists, but as you can see from the actual returns, the output last season, only 4 goals is maybe a pretty significant underperformance if we're being realistic here. And yes, he is more of a creator than a goal scorer. That is very clear in the way that they set up. But he still should be in line for plenty of attacking returns. 7.5 million definitely puts him in the fun zone. And whilst there are good options at 6.5, I think he is a player that most of us, probably including myself, if I'm being honest, will probably overlook at the start of the season, but will become a factor once we are reminded of how prolific he can be. And another factor going in his favour, more so than Brennan Johnson, more so than Bailey, more so than Barnes, all differential midfielders I've mentioned on this video, he is much more likely to be a bonus points monster this season. He did pretty well for it last season anyway, but with the bonus points changes, and thank you very much to Above Average FPL, by the way, so credit goes to them, and FPL.team who crunched the numbers. If you apply this year's rules for bonus points to last year's data, he would have come away with 12 more points than he did anyway. So his season would have been even better than it was if those rules had been applied. And of course, we're living now in a reality where those rules do matter. They do apply. So I do expect him to have a pretty decent season. And I think at some point he's going to be a pretty significant part of our lineup in FPL this year. Whether or not you want to go for him and take that punt, take that leap from the start is a different matter. But like I said, those first two games do look good. So if you weren't completely convinced by Brennan Johnson, maybe have a look at James Maddison instead. Again, this all basically depends on whether or not you can afford Son Heung-min, who is another pretty differential option who I really like the look of. But for a bit cheaper, I do like the look of Maddison. So again, let me know in the comments, out of those three, which are you more likely to go for? Son Heung-min, James Maddison, or Brennan Johnson? Really interested to hear that. And as we wrap up today's video, I'd really appreciate it if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any future content. For the time being though, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time as we start really getting prepared for Game Week 1 in FPL.